cheesy opening. Cheesy? No. Outstanding opening means we have
Why
four
can't it be
teams.
both?
Cheesy and outstanding, like the quesadilla of your college football dreams.
Okay, yeah.
Right,
this
yeah,
all
yeah.
works. Keep going. Keep going.
We have four teams that are now officially going to be in the college football playoff that will culminate in beautiful Tampa, Florida.
Tampa, Florida.
They're playing outside of Busch Gardens.
Our producers wanted to know, like, what's a good Tampa photo we should put up? And of course, they're playing this game in Raymond James Stadium, home of the Buccaneers. I wasn't going to use that. I was going to use Busch Gardens. Are you kidding me? So many formative moments.
Oh, really? Is that true?
Busch Gardens. I can't talk about any.
Oh, okay. Legally, Ryan is not allowed. There is still
Pending litigation. Decades
litigation. With that, we have four teams. The number one seed is Alabama, to nobody's surprise, after they throttled the Florida Gators yesterday. Okay. They will be taking on the Washington Huskies, who themselves did away pretty neatly and without kindness, the Colorado Buffaloes on Friday night. A great season for both of those teams. So they will be playing in Atlanta in semifinal number one in the Peach Bowl. And on the other side, as you can see, Clemson and Ohio State will be taking each other on in the Fiesta Bowl in the desert in Glendale, Arizona. Let's start with this. Of course, his name is Ryan Nanny. Mine is Dan Rubenstein.
Yeah.
That was a dramatic
Oh,
way
yeah,
of saying
that's
it.
good.
Did the committee get it right? 1 through 4.
I guess. I mean, you could probably quibble about seeding, about if you're going to put Ohio State in and they don't play in their conference championship game, and
Right.
the other three teams do, shouldn't they be behind all of them?
Right.
Just as some sort of matter of misguided principle. I think the reality of this year is that nobody got in that was undeserving. Are there teams
Right.
who are potentially deserving that got left out? Yes, but that's sort of the nature of having a 4-team playoff. It was definitely true of having a 2-team playoff when we just had a national championship game. They at least got it consistent.
Right.
I think it would have been more frustrating to college football as a whole, not necessarily to a specific fan base, if the playoff committee had said last week, Ohio State's the number 2 team in the nation. We know they lost to Penn State. We know Penn State's going to play for the Big Ten title, et cetera, and then said, nope, Ohio State's out.
Right.
I 100% hear why Penn State fans disagree with this decision. But from a matter of consistency, I appreciate that they at least didn't say, like, hey, ignore everything we do until the last one.
Right. That would be relatively nice, but it gins up interest. And listen, at the end, and this is not to sound cynical, this is a TV show. This is entertainment. So we need to promote entertainment.
It's a very short series.
It's a mini-series.
It's a British docudrama.
It's a British docudrama.
Yeah.
So here's what I think is important. The Big Ten season happened. The Pac-12 season happened. The SEC season happened. The playoff does not have anything to do with those things. They did not organize the Big Ten season.
Right.
They did not organize the SEC season. Their job is, at the end of these self-contained independent things, to select the 4 teams that they feel like using a different...
I'm really excited to see what adjective you use here.
A recipe. They're using a recipe that's saying, okay, we do want conference championships. That is an important thing, but we don't want it to taste only like a conference champion.
Okay.
It is an element. And I understand that they're trying to find the best possible matchups and the best possible 4 teams, but to say that, like, Penn State 100% deserves to be in the playoff because they won the Big Ten ignores the fact that the playoff committee has nothing to do with Big Ten divisional alignments, non-conference schedules. They're using that as an element.
Well, it also helps that, in the end, there was nothing that tricky about what the committee was looking at or had to do. I mean, Clemson won. If Clemson doesn't win last night against Virginia Tech, this whole thing gets a lot weirder. If Pitt doesn't beat Penn State at the beginning of the year, this whole thing gets a lot trickier. If Houston doesn't beat Oklahoma at the start of the year, this whole so in some
if
sense,
Oklahoma State does away with Central Michigan in an organized fashion.
So in some sense, this became relatively easy, just in the sense that they said, okay, undefeated teams in power conferences. Great, you're in. 1-loss teams in power conferences. Yep, you're in too. And beyond that, it was sort of like, if you had to make some incredibly compelling case to get in with 2 losses. I guess it's fair that nobody did here. I mean, the question is this. If we were talking about a Penn State team that, let's say, they lost to Michigan in overtime. That's a close game, not a bad loss, et cetera, et cetera. Is that enough to shift the balance? And if so, does that come at Washington's expense? That's the other thing, is people really looked at this as like Ohio State, Penn State. Which one's going to get in?
Right.
Based on the final ranking, Washington was the one that was on the knife's edge, not Ohio State.
This is true, and I think it's important to also realize the best teams in college football, broadly speaking, take advantage of very big opportunities and small moments or big moments, and that's where we are right now. Quickly before we have Eric from Roll Bama Roll, our outstanding Alabama community, to come on here in a second. Who do you think, now that we've seen, so it would be Washington in the first round and either Ohio State or Clemson in a possible national championship, who is best built on both sides of the ball and coached to a point that you can say this team is the team that has the best chance of beating Alabama?
So all of this is kind of, swathed in the suggestion that this playoff is anything but sort of a coronation for Alabama. And at this point, I don't feel great about any of
Who's next?
Teams. If I had to pick one right now, I think I'm picking Ohio State.
Why is that?
Because they have the fewest number of giveaways of any of these three teams left. They've only turned the ball over 9 times. They also have the best run defense and the best kick coverage.
Right.
Both punting and kickoff return combined of the other 3 teams in the playoff.
Right.
This sounds very simple, but I think if you have any chance of beating Alabama, you can't give them
Can't give away moments.
easy oxygen, basically. And that's turnovers, that's punt returns, kick returns, that's
explosion plays.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think Ohio State best understands how to limit that. Granted, Ohio State's sole loss happened on a special teams play.
This is true.
Special teams almost lost them the Michigan game.
Yep.
So I don't necessarily feel outstanding about it, but Ohio State, I think, is the one that I'm like, okay, I'm willing to see how, if they play a perfect game, they're the ones that can knock Alabama off the pedestal.
Of the teams that are going to potentially play Alabama, they have the best defense and the best head coach. And
I think that's true.
It's a little reductive, but
Clemson is an interesting case on both of those points as well.
Yes, absolutely.
But right now, I think that's true.
And as we saw last year, special teams moments.
Yeah.
Clemson, Alabama. All right, with that, let's bring in Eric from Roll Bama Roll. Welcome to the show, Eric. And first off, where is Alabama? And this is going to be a very difficult question because you have many possible answers. Where does Alabama have the most momentum on either side of the ball or in special teams?
As far as momentum goes, I think it's really the development of some of the younger players. We've had a lot of injuries and a lot of transfers. So you've got, guys stepping up, going 3 and 4 deep as running backs, and you've got, a really solid group in the secondary and in the linebacking core. So really, the youth movement is coming on nicely, and that's where I think Alabama has the most momentum.
I think that it's a good answer to say they have so many good players.
Yeah,
that's where the momentum
it's
is.
Not inaccurate. Eric, as a Florida fan, first of all, thanks for not making it 100 points. I appreciate that. Second, I think if I have any sense of what the media is going to do now, because part of the media's job is to say, well, let's take what looks like a fairly assumed outcome and figure out ways that it might not go that way. I can see media members looking at Jalen Hurts in the SEC championship game and in some other games this season and saying, well, he doesn't necessarily have the passing profile you're looking for from a championship quarterback. Is it fair to say that we should just ignore everything that Alabama's done from an offensive perspective the last 2 weeks, really, since once they knew they were basically in the playoff, it felt to me like what they were doing, both in the Iron Bowl and against Florida, were more about development or about trying different things and weren't necessarily like, hey, this is what we think is our absolute number one game plan?
Yeah, that's a very good point. It was super conservative game plan. And you saw that in the LSU game, too, where, Lane Kiffin was trying to protect Jalen Hurts. Alabama only threw 20 passes yesterday, for instance. I don't think the offense you've seen really in the last 4 or 5 weeks is going to be the offense in the playoffs going forward.
So Dan and I are arguing over who we think has the best chance to dethrone the Crimson Tide right now. This may be a stretch for you, but which team do you look at and say, okay, that's the team that if I'm watching Alabama play that team on a neutral site, I have the least confidence. Let's put it that way.
Yeah, they can take advantage of X.
Right, exactly.
This is really kind of easy to me. The Clemson Tigers. They have the experience.
Yep.
They have the best player in the country, not named Jonathan Allen. They have the combination of things that that it takes to beat Alabama, which is general zaniness, an offense that is very vertical. They stretch the field a lot, and they've got a really active front seven. The secondary's got issues, and obviously there's some curious coaching down the stretch in nearly every Clemson game. But they've been there. They've got a really lethal passing game, and with an Alabama defense that's had to play a walk-on at corner down the season, that really is the team that gives Alabama the worst matchup problem.
Eric, thank you very much for your time, and you know what? Have fun watching Alabama.
I'll say it. Roll Tide.
Roll Tide.
Roll Tide.
And obviously, Eric mentions, and he says the second best player in college football beyond Jonathan Allen, Hunter Renfrow, obviously, is who he's referring to.
Yeah.
Clemson is an interesting team right now because we've seen them get here to this point in the playoff and then to the national championship game.
Clemson should not be. If there's one team that I'm like, this team won't be intimidated, will not shrink from the moment, based not just on their experience last year, but they played so many big games this year.
Right.
Yeah, Clemson I feel fine about from that perspective.
I feel very good about Clemson. I'm a little bit worried because we saw what Clemson was able to do defensively last year, at least until they got sort of hurt in the secondary.
Yep.
They rushed the quarterback so well in that national championship game, and both of those guys are gone. And I know they have got a lot of youth that's really great at collapsing the pocket and sort of protecting sideline to sideline, but I'd be a little bit worried without Shaq Lawrence and Kevin Dodd, that they're not there, that they don't have that experienced defensive line in a situation like this. But I think his point is smart about Clemson.
Yeah, the other thing that's interesting about Clemson is they are the team that feels like they have the highest ceiling of the other of the non-Alabama teams in the playoff, where you can say, based on what you've seen them do this year and last year, you're like, yes, when Clemson gets it going, they can go toe-to-toe with Alabama. The problem is that Clemson doesn't always get it going, or they'll do it inconsistently throughout a game.
Like they put the wrong gasoline in their 2016 car.
Yes, and then Dad is super pissed.
Is not happy. All right, with that, let's check in with Ben from Shaking the Southland, of course, our outstanding Clemson community. Ben, first of all, congratulations on a very successful, albeit a little bit worrisome season at times for the Tigers. Right now, as you look at Clemson, who survived Virginia Tech, a good Virginia Tech team, where is the momentum with Clemson? Where are they operating at the highest level?
Well, thank you for having me on. And yes, excuse my voice. There's a lot of yelling that happened last night, but I'm loving all of this Clemson love that I'm getting. Obviously, right now, Deshaun Watson his accuracy, he's playing at a little bit of a higher level. And I think the thing that's really stood out is the wide receiver play as the season has progressed. Early on, people don't realize that there are a lot of drop balls going on with this team that were just kind of inexplicable. But Clemson really has, a wide receiver, Deshaun Watson, and that's the kind of thing that's going to, cause problems for Ohio State and Bama moving forward.
What do you think, Ben, is the biggest difference between Clemson, last year's Clemson team came so close in the national championship, and this year's Clemson team, which has a lot of familiar faces, but also, as Dan was sort of alluding to earlier, has lost some of the key contributors, especially on the defensive side of the ball?
Well, I actually disagree that I think the defensive line is just as good this year, if not a little bit better, because of true freshman Dexter Lawrence, who's just a man-child in the middle, the Dex Star, fully operational, and Christian Wilkins, who had to, shift out on the outside. So Cleveland Farrell, Austin Bryant is coming back. I think the defensive line is good. We're, as you saw last night, we have these lapses still in the secondary that are happening, and I think that's a little bit of the difference on defense from last year. On offense, we're still trying to figure it out on the offensive line, being able to run up the A-gap. That hasn't been consistent all year. And if Clemson is able to run the ball up the A-gap, then it opens everything else up on the offense, for the offense. So that I think is the difference, if Clemson can run the ball or not. If I'm the defensive coordinator, I'm stopping that A-gap, putting Clemson in third and longs, dialing up exotic blitzes, trying to do what Bud Foster did yesterday. But for me, the big key is always Jordan Leggett. And if Jordan Leggett, he causes so many matchup problems for you, kind of in a pick your poison situation. So you're going to cover over the top with the safety on Mike Williams, or you're going to leave him on an island, or you're going to cover Jordan Leggett. And so that's really where Clemson's offense becomes elite.
When you look at the Ohio State matchup, what do you look at and sort of say, okay, if this is on a fulcrum, this is the matchup, or this is the unit that's going to decide who wins this game between the Tigers and the Buckeyes?
Well, I think actually Clemson wanted this matchup. Of all of the teams obviously nobody wants to go against Alabama, but I think Clemson has this, especially the coaches have this optimism, quiet confidence about going up against Ohio State, because they feel like they can bottle up JT Barrett. They can keep him inside and keep him from running because of their strong front seven, who like to attack. I mean, that's the strength of the Brent Venables defense, is just to attack. And they don't think he can push the ball down the field as effectively. So I think they like this matchup. They got Urban Meyer in the Orange Bowl a couple years ago, and they feel like this is a good matchup for them on defense. And on offense, the Ohio State is very talented, but again, Jordan Leggett gives you those matchup problems over the middle of the field.
All right, Ben, thank you very much for your time, and please do enjoy watching Clemson, and save that voice, because you might need it for a few more weeks.
Thank you, guys.
No problem. What I thought was interesting about this matchup originally when I saw it was, what is Ohio State going to do if that offensive line, which we saw struggle against Michigan, and Clemson's defensive front is arguably even more talented, maybe not as productive as Michigan's, what does Ohio State do to adjust? And if it is a weakness of Clemson, which I think is fair to say that their secondary has struggled at times this year, losing Mackenzie Alexander, who was such a huge player for them last year, what does Ohio State do to get the ball out of JT Barrett's hands quickly, and how well can Clemson's secondary and maybe outside linebackers tackle in the open field against some really talented Ohio State skill players?
So I think this is potentially where bowl practices come into it, because we have to remember Ohio State is still an incredibly young team considering how many players they lost off of the last two rosters. That suggests to me that there is some potential for Ohio State to still install a wrinkle or two in the offense that can make the passing game more effective downfield. Because if they can't, I think Ben's absolutely right that the secondary is the place where Clemson is weakest on the defense. And if they're trying to keep everything short, trying to sort of like that feels like a very disastrous angle to me. But Urban Meyer
Good solution for a bad secondary. A front that is excellent.
Yeah, and Urban Meyer is one of those coaches that I think has earned the esteem of saying, yes, you give him time and you give him enough raw talent over the course of the season, bowl practices, etc. I think he can put Ohio State in a position to not get totally dominated up front, or at least find ways to work around that. Whether or not they do, I mean, listen. I have no idea.
Worth noting, Urban Meyer, how many times has he lost in the college football playoff? Be 0 times. Be 0 times. So with time to prepare, long distance time, short distance time, he's gotten the job done in a very small sample size. With that, we bring in the immortal Bud Elliott, of course.
He's immortal?
He is immortal.
Oh, man.
If you had to guess which SB Nation college football staff member is immortal.
Yeah.
It has to be Bud, right?
I guess so, because he'd do it just to spite Florida fans.
He would indeed. All right, we bring in Bud Elliott, of course. There he is on Skype. Tomahawk Nation, SB Nation College Football, SB Nation Recruiting. Bud, just from an entertainment standpoint, did the committee get it right? Are you excited for these 4 teams to square off?
Yeah, I think they did get it right. I mean, look, I think Penn State-Washington is an interesting debate, but, Penn State has 2 losses, and we talk about the non-conference schedule and how it should be important, and it is important. But you have to win the non-conference game. It's sort of the Oklahoma argument. It's like, yeah, you scheduled Houston, Ohio State, but you took 2 L's. Don't lose to Pitt, and you're in the playoff.
Yeah.
Don't lose to Pitt. You might actually be over Ohio State in these playoff rankings, and then we're probably debating Ohio State, Washington at that point. I have no problem with Washington. I really don't think that if you look at the overall schedule, that Washington's schedule was that much weaker. It's just the non-conference that was weaker than Penn State's.
Fair enough. When you look at the teams in this playoff, I think I know your answer, but I'm always wrong, so I'm probably going to be wrong here. Where is the talent drop-off? Because we have Alabama, who is recruited better than everybody maybe ever. We have Clemson, who is recruited exceedingly well, and certainly Ohio State is almost recently, I think, at that Alabama level, and Washington feels like they are a step behind these three other teams, but they have a 5-star coach. Is that where the drop-off is?
I think it is. Yeah, it's not a good sign. I have my database pulled up here. If I have to scroll to find your team, that's probably an issue. Not to mention that at Washington, unfortunately, they're missing Joe Mathis out with injury. They're missing their top linebacker. Alabama, they've been, if you watch them in recent weeks, they've been doing some different things. They basically used the Mississippi State game as a passing scrimmage against Auburn. They didn't look very good offensively. They've been trying some different things, but then we kind of saw it yesterday against Florida. Maybe middle third quarter, I think Saban was kind of like Kiffin, hey, enough of this, just finish him, run the ball. And they did. I mean, they probably had, 150 rushing yards over the final 20 minutes. So I think that does not bode well for Washington, being able to handle them with the physicality up front. If you look at the most physical teams Washington played, it'd probably Utah and USC. Mm-hmm. Correct. Those were struggle games. Bama is probably the most physical team out there. That could be tough. The other teams, talent-wise, I think Ohio State and Clemson are pretty close. They both recruit at an elite level. They're both kind of over that mythical 50% mark of bringing in more 4 and 5 stars as opposed to 2 and 3 stars. They both have a lot of playmakers defensively, and I think they're both very well coached. I mean, I think Urban Meyer, he has a national title. That's a great staff, though. The Fickell-Schiano combo, I think, is really good defensively, and we all know about Brent Venables.
But let's do a little thought exercise here. Let's go outside the current top 4 and throw everything out. I don't care about records. I don't care about who won a conference. I don't care about non-conference record. If you got to pick one playoff team besides these 4, just based on who's on the roster talent-wise and what you've seen that talent do this season, what's the sort of mystery all-star team that you're putting in and again, 3 losses, 4 losses, whatever it is, go nuts.
I think it's USC.
Yes.
I mean, they
West Coast guy, Bud Elliott.
hey, West Coast, right? I mean, they beat the hell out of Washington in Washington. I mean, it wasn't close, and it was a domination. Not a lot of fluky scores. They beat them up front. They beat them over the top. It wasn't close. And since USC has gone to Sam Darnold, they seem to have figured some things out. And a lot of us, including myself, I think, criticized Clay Helton early on in the year because they were playing really poorly. But for as much as they underachieved in September, I think they're now achieving to what their true talent level is in October, November, and now into December.
Yeah, I think if USC had managed to sneak into the Pac-12 championship game,
Right.
I think it would have been really, and let's say they had done it with 2 losses. Mm-hmm. I think that would have been the more interesting
Man, the
debate
end of that
point.
Utah game.
Yes,
Such weird,
yes.
the moments that have decided this season. Bud talked about the Pitt game with Penn State, the end of the Utah game for USC. That would have changed things entirely. Bud, you both cover recruiting, and also you like a little bit of college football gambling. So Alabama's going to be favored no matter who they play. If it's Ohio State or Clemson in the national championship game, I don't have the spread in front of me for the Washington game, but it's safe to assume that they're favored against Washington. What is the best bet team with the way that they're constructed, talent level, performance on the field, performance against the spread, whatever, that you would pick to beat or even just keep it close, take Bama to overtime? Is it Clemson? Is it Ohio State? Is it Washington?
That's a really good question. I think it might be Clemson just because they played with them last year, so they believe they can play with them. They have a lot of talent up front. Some of Clemson's weaknesses, I don't know, are all that well exploited right now by Alabama. Alabama's downfield passing game is not really that good, except when they spring guys wide open, which Clemson has done sometimes this year with some coverage busts. But Jalen Hurts is not really dissecting people down the field very often. Clemson does sell out to stop the run, and they could stop Bama's run game. And if Deshaun Watson plays his A game, which he hasn't done all that much this year, but we've seen it in spurts and flashes, if he's on, I think they could beat Alabama. Now, would I pick them to do it? No, but I think that they probably have the best chance. The reason why I go Clemson over Ohio State is because JT Barrett has kind of been sneaky, just average.
Yeah.
And I really don't think you can be that one-dimensional and beat Alabama. Cardale Jones played a really good set of 3 games that year, when they took him down in the Sugar Bowl. But JT Barrett this year is just not. I don't think he's done it against the top teams.
Fair enough. But Elliot, thank you very much for your time, and enjoy your playoff. I think it's still going to be pretty fun.
It's going to be great.
All right, so Bud Elliott, of course, and I think it's fair to say, once again, immortal.
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 Man, just, the guy has everything. It's terrible.
Anything that stood out from what Bud said that was particularly interesting to you? I think the quarterback thing is worth talking about.
The quarterback thing is worth talking about, but I think what's interesting to me is consider who Alabama has faced. The quarterbacks Alabama has faced over the entirety of the season.
Yeah.
We already said they didn't play against Sam Darnold.
Right.
Who, granted, I don't know
he came in that game, but he was not October Sam Darnold.
For all intents and purposes,
Right.
they did not face Sam
Correct.
Darnold. SEC West quarterback of your choice? Who are we all that impressed by at this point in terms of consistent?
A half of Chad Kelly.
Yeah.
Of good Chad Kelly.
Of good Chad Kelly and a half of bad Chad.
A half of pretty good Trevor Knight.
Yeah.
But it's a half a quarterback isn't enough.
Right.
It most certainly is not.
So I do think it's fair to say that starting with the Washington game,
Yeah.
Alabama's going to have the toughest opposing quarterback test that they've had all season.
Yes.
And that will be very interesting to watch just because sort of the subtext, and it's been less subtext and more just we're talking about it out in the open for Alabama this season, is that they look like the far and away number one team in the country.
Yep.
They don't look particularly challenged. They don't look particularly bothered. I mean, really since, I guess you would say, halftime of the Texas A&M game.
Right.
And even that sort of had the feeling of well, okay, they're just sort of playing with their food before they're eating it. That said, the SEC this year, and it's not like Alabama sort of dodged somebody good in the SEC East or something. I mean, between Tennessee, Kentucky, and Florida, those were the top three teams at the end of the year in that division. They played the entire SEC West. And again, we've said it before, every team in the SEC other than Alabama, 4-loss team. I don't know how much it proves about you when you beat a bunch of teams that lost 3 other games, so how good can they be?
Right.
And you beat a USC team at the beginning of the year that really had no idea what it was and it looks nothing like the team it is now.
Right.
So there is sort of this question of who are they? What is it going to be like when they're pushed, when they're tested? I don't know that Washington's necessarily going to do that, but I do think just in terms of quarterback, wide receiver combinations, it's very hard to look at the schedule and say, oh yes, they've already faced something at that level before.
I think this is totally correct, and it is weird that in 2016, after years and years, decades of the SEC, we are saying, what's Alabama's most impressive win? A different looking Pac-12 team.
Right.
That is the most impressive win.
Yeah.
It's strange to say, but let's go back to the Ohio State-Clemson matchup because we are now fortunate enough to have Luke Zimmerman on.
My boy! My sweet baby boy!
Sweet baby boy Luke Zimmerman from SBNation.com and, of course, Land Grant Holy Land, our Ohio State community. So, Luke, your reaction to both Ohio State seed, their opponent, and general feeling about how they are playing this very second.
Well, I think I was talking about this a little bit ago. You go back 2 years, and I think on the anxiety scale of 1 to 10, I was about a constant 11 from noon until Ohio State was announced as that 4 seed. This year, I would say I was about a 5.5. I was a 0 until last night at about 11 o'clock when Penn State completed their comeback and won. I was about a 5.5 today. And then when I saw Clemson number 2, I saw, that roller coaster heart sinking into your chest feeling. I'm like, things that I don't want to say on air
Sure.
may or may not have come out loud. But the good news is there wasn't much weight. It was sort of a weight off your shoulder sensation after that brief spike of pure panic and fear. But Ohio State's in. I think that's all they could ask for at this point. I did not, as an alum and fan, I try to be objective certainly, but as an alum and fan, I did not want Alabama in the first round for obvious reasons. So I think, Clemson is a really good team. We certainly saw when the two teams faced off 3 years ago. Granted, this is going to be much different in terms of the personnel. There's so few returning players from those teams. It's not really a great analogy, but we saw that Ohio State team was able to fall to a Davos 20, coach team. And I think that the Buckeyes have their work cut out for them. They were one of the most uneven teams in the country despite their record and despite having maybe the most impressive list of wins amongst any team in the country. But they've already proven they can beat teams better than them in Michigan. So I would not be shocked if Ohio State won. But I will say I'm surprised that Vegas has come out and had the Buckeyes as 3-point favorites. That just seems like trying to take gullible Ohio State fans' money personally. But.
Why would anybody ever want to do that? Luke, obviously Ohio State is now making history as, I believe, the first playoff participant who didn't win their conference, didn't even play for conference championship. Why do you think that? I mean, there are a lot of reasons why you can go, and they range from purely analytical to completely cynical. But if you had to sort of put your finger on, this was the thing that made the playoff committee not just say Ohio State deserves to be in the playoff, but they deserve to be a top 3 seed in the playoff. What was the one sort of deciding factor in your mind?
Yeah, Urban Meyer was just on ESPN talking to Reese Davis, and he said that in his opinion, based on the research he did, it was that dominant win over Oklahoma on the road. So I know, I tweeted something to the effect of like, kids just don't lose twice. Right after the news was announced and Penn State was snubbed, which of course led to just a barrage, an avalanche of Penn State fans saying, just schedule nothing but FCS teams and Rutgers, and that's how you get in. I think not losing twice is kind of important and significant, clearly, but I think also if you are going to lose to someone good and ideally play someone hard. So I think the committee, they kind of spoke out of both ends of their mouth, both rewarding Washington for not playing anyone and then kind of super rewarding Ohio State for playing someone. But I think that won at the end of the day, especially how they won. It wasn't like, if Oklahoma had fallen apart after losing their second, and proven to be like a 4 or 5 win team, then maybe we're not having this conversation right now, or the conversation we're having is a much different one. But I think that, and then just, certainly say what you will about the better team winning in the game a couple weekends ago after Thanksgiving, but Ohio State won. And, when you have those two kind of marquee wins, it, especially when you're one of your biggest competitors and the team that beat you and won your, co-won your division, represented your conference, and won the conference championship, was blown out by that team. I think it helps when you take care of business against them.
Luke, I think anybody that has watched Ohio State, particularly this past month, and seen both where they've succeeded and where they've struggled, knows that this defense, while young, has been outstanding, particularly that secondary who turns over everybody. But on offense, it is somewhat clear that if you're able to shut down Ohio State on the ground, or at least keep the running game in front of you and force JT Barrett to make plays downfield, they struggle to pull away or even beat the better teams that are placed in front of them. Do you see late fall, early winter JT Barrett in 2016 as a quarterback who can beat a good team with his arm if called to do so?
Yeah, I mean, I honestly, the more I think about it, especially after having watched Clemson on a neutral field in Florida, look a little uneven against a not juggernaut Virginia Tech offense. I think JT can play well enough. I mean, that's the big question. There's been, I've been as big of a critic of Barrett as anyone. We've had kind of some internal land-grant, Holy Land discussions about how to approach JT's legacy. I mean, the guy beat Michigan 3 times, helped Ohio State win a national championship. I think now it's pretty immortalized, but especially before that game, the way he's played the last 2 years has left a lot to be desired. He was the Big Ten's quarterback of the year, and I think that there's some really good cases for a bunch of other guys who aren't him. So I think it's possible for him to, make the plays downfield that he needs to, especially seeing Virginia Tech do it. Clemson had this really weird play where they didn't rush anybody, and Virginia Tech still completed a pass downfield. So that gives me hope for Ohio State. And I think, honestly, it's not really so much, JT does make his missed throws. He's had some really bad games. If there's any kind of weather in the mix at all, which, hey, thankfully, they're going to be playing in a climate-controlled, retractable roof facility, and, delightful this time of year anyway, Glendale, Arizona. I think that works out because JT doesn't have the arm strength to really overcome conditions. As Ohio State, I think, has been the most, star-crossed team weather-wise, I think, in the history of college football this season. Like 3 of their first 4 games had winds over 15 miles per hour with rain and or sleet kind of going on. And then, we saw again against Michigan State in a game that had snow and wind. For really like the second straight year, Barrett wasn't able to complete the passes downfield. But I will say so much of it is Ohio State's really young wide receivers. I think Penn State, James Franklin mentioned last night, they're the 5th youngest team in college football. Ohio State's the youngest amongst any Power 5 teams. So they have all these inexperienced but talented 4- and 5-star guys, and no one in the wide receiver, capacity or pass catching capacity has really consistently stepped up. So I think if you look at the statistics, and this is something that shocked me, passes downfield, deep passes, like greater than 15 yards, are roughly the same clip as they were 2 years ago when Barrett was throwing passes to NFL guys like Michael Thomas. So maybe it's more of an optics thing. Maybe he's not completing the short intermediary passes. But if Ohio State's young wide receivers can get in a groove, Clemson secondary certainly said that there are some holes to be exploited. against Virginia Tech. So I'm not, super nervous in that capacity. It's just, can Ohio State stop the opposing quarterback in that offense? That's easier said than done.
Luke, before we let you go, I'm going to put you on the spot and ask you a question. I think it might be the hardest question we've asked all day.
Yes.
Who's more mad online? Michigan fans after last week or Penn State fans this week?
Ooh.
I don't think it's even a competition. There is a prominent Michigan writer who has raised the media and madness level online far beyond the reach of any fan base. So I'm going to have to go with Ohio State's rivals, Michigan.
Wow. Penn State, I really thought you might win this one. Oh, boy.
They usually do.
Wow.
Wow, so Penn State lost a game, lost a matchup that they should have taken, huh?
Okay, that's unnecessary. Luke, thank you very much. We look forward to watching Ohio State and this very young Buckeyes team.
Yeah.
Testament to Urban Meyer. But we'll see what they do against Clemson. Good luck.
Thanks, guys.
All right. No, I think his point about Ohio State's youth is pretty important. Not many people know
it's astonishing.
Yeah, it was last week was Noah Brown's bar mitzvah.
Oh, hey. Good for him.
Yeah.
Good for him.
Yeah.
So we have one more playoff team to talk about.
Yes.
And I don't want people to come in here and think, the bitter Oregon fan, idiot SEC fan.
I'm an at-peace Oregon fan.
They're just, okay, sure you are. Sure. They could be literally hiring Greg Schiano right now.
Oh, see, that was the meanest thing you could
wouldn't
say.
know it. That's the beauty
All
of
right,
this
I'm
show.
leaving. That's it. That's it. I'm changing.
But we're not going to shortchange Washington. We're not just going to say why bother talking about Washington because Alabama's going to beat them.
Right.
We're bringing on the smartest man who works at our company.
Yeah.
The most accomplished and I think like the third daddest.
Okay.
Of the dads.
Okay, Chris Plant? Is Chris Plant coming in?
Yes, it's Chris Plant coming in. No, it's Bill Connolly. Bill.
There he is. Oh, there he is.
I hope you're okay with your bronze medal dad ranking. I don't mean that to be I don't mean that to imply the quality of your fatherhood, just how dad you are as a person.
It gives you something to aspire to, so I'm okay with it.
That's right. Always climbing higher. Bill, let's talk about Washington. Just give us the initial dive into the advanced metrics behind Washington. What do they do well? What are their flaws? What do you like about them? What should we be worried about?
Why are they justifiably here? Yeah.
First of all, congrats to Dan for having Washington nailed all year.
Come on, baby. It's all in here. It's all in here.
Right. Like 9 months ago, you had the guts to say that this was a playoff team that might not lose a single game, and they came pretty close to doing that.
Lone voice in the wind.
I think Washington, they basically they lived up to exactly what the stats, the projections and everything said they would do. They had a great defense last year. They have a good defense this year. Their offense matured enough to kind of break through. If we compare them to Alabama here, which is unfair to do, obviously you have to worry about Washington's offensive line, the offensive line that got blown up by USC a few weeks ago that really kind of just completely defined that game. Alabama's got a pretty good defensive front, a decent defensive front that might give them some problems. But Washington, I think, the most impressive thing to me about the Huskies, right now, I'm looking at the new S&P rankings that I put up this morning. Washington's the only team with a top 10 offense and defense. And I think that pretty much tells the tale. They have been able to dominate teams, take teams out of their offensive rhythm, whatever the offense wants to do, whether it be a run or pass. They've been able to force opponents into plan B, plan C. Most of the time it has worked. And, the offense, if the offensive line has anything to offer, then the offense can pretty much do the same thing. That if you've got a good pass defense, they'll run on you. If you got a good run defense, they'll pass on you. Alabama has both. That's going to be a problem. Washington's been very, very good this year, and they're incredibly deserving of being in the playoff.
All right, when you look at what Chris Peterson has been able to do throughout the course of his career, where is your confidence level that he will be able to, with a little over 3 weeks, to design an offense that is able to exploit? And listen, better quarterbacks, and that's, again, half of Trevor Knight and half of Chad Kelly, have been able to exploit Alabama downfield. Jake Browning is one of the most efficient quarterbacks in the country. He has 3 really good receivers, and McClatcher and John Ross and Dante Pettis. Do you see this as a situation in which Jake Browning is good enough to make Washington and their passing game an element of this matchup that should scare Alabama a good deal?
For a while. I mean, Austin Appleby did it the other day. Alabama's secondary has a lot of questions to answer right now, and Jake Browning should be more than capable of asking those questions. It's really kind of a matter of what they're going to be able to do on standard downs. It was passing downs that they got eaten up on by USC, and if they can stay out of those situations as much as possible, as much as you can against Alabama, and basically you're asking him to make a handful of big plays on passing downs as opposed to every third down the entire game, then, I mean, they're going to have a chance to move the ball a little bit. You do have to exploit Alabama's shakiness in the secondary, and it's really only shakiness by Alabama's standards. But it is an opportunity there as long as they can avoid obvious pass 3rd and 9 type of situations.
Bill, Washington, you sort of, Dan, as we said, saw this coming a mile away. But, I think you've also said that they sort of followed the blueprint for if they were going to reach this level, this is how they were going to do it. Who's been the biggest surprise for you this season from an analytics perspective? Who's the team that just took the leap that you thought, yeah, maybe they're going to do that, but I really don't see it happening? Or maybe the flip side of that, who's the team that's had the steepest fall that you just sort of look at and you're like, how the hell did that team go from here all the way to here?
Well, I mean, I think, Penn State, I thought might be capable of this. And now, I mean, we're talking, they're only 12th in S&P. Like, the computers don't like them as much as our eyes have the last couple of months. But they're still a top 12 team at worst. And I think when I was writing the Penn State preview this offseason, the whole time I was thinking, I think they can be good. I don't know, though, because their flaws were very, very obvious. And I could tell you how they had improved on paper. Their defensive coordinator and offensive line coach had just jetted town at the first opportunity. So there was certainly reason to doubt whether Penn State could put the pieces together. And then they lost to Pitt. You thought that might be a huge deal. They almost lost to Temple, too. Right. They turned it on. They're a young team that improved throughout, and they were one of the best teams in the country the last month or two of the year. So that was something that I didn't necessarily expect to see. On the flip side, there's this team that plays in Oxford, Mississippi that never really saw the 100% Ole Miss team this year. The defense was getting banged up right out of the gates. Right. They were hilariously volatile for a while in terms of being amazing and then terrible and amazing and then terrible. And then their quarterback got hurt and they were just terrible. So it's not really, when you suffer enough injuries, maybe it's not fair to point that one out as a disappointment, but they certainly, expectations versus reality were pretty different in the end.
Yeah, Ole Miss had about 4 different seasons, it feels like, wrapped up into one. So that's efficient at least.
That
I'll give
is
them credit for that.
Extremely efficient. Bill, we'll go back to Washington just for a second. A lot of people like to look at opponents and strength of schedule and how well prepared teams are. I mean, the SEC is certainly down. The ACC looks deeper than it has been these past few years. The Big Ten has 3 teams in the top 6 of the playoff rankings. When you look at the Pac-12 and what Washington was or was not able to do, what does that experience tell us about Washington, not even just against Alabama, but just the snapshot of Washington as a whole?
Well, I think, the difference between, say, the Pac-12 and the Big Ten this year, obviously the Big Ten probably has the best top tier in the country this year. They also have Rutgers and Illinois and Purdue and some really, really bad bottom teams. Mm-hmm. And so even though you had these big matchups, like, Ohio State obviously faced Penn State and Michigan, among others. They got Oklahoma in non-conference, but they still played Rutgers. They still had some easier battles. Washington has been the opposite. They haven't had as many elite games against elite teams. And an approaching elite team like USC actually kind of, handed it to them a little bit, but they haven't had as many gimmies either, at least not in the last couple months of the year. Even Arizona's pretty bad, but they played Arizona when Arizona was at whatever its peak effectiveness was. They played them then. Stanford ended up not being nearly as bad as I think people thought at the time. They had to play Utah. They had to win a track meet at Cal. They had to play USC, Washington State. They manhandled Colorado. I think they played more good teams, just not nearly as many great teams as everybody else. And obviously, that probably doesn't help you against Alabama, but I keep going back to Bama. I'm trying to be positive, though, so we'll stop thinking about who they play.
I think it's nice that Rutgers got to play 2 playoff teams this year.
Yeah.
I think that's really cool. That's I think that's a good sign for an up and coming FCS program.
Oh
Sure.
man, that is so mean. All right, Bill, thank you very much for your time, and look forward to seeing how this all shakes out.
Listen to Podcast Ain't Played Nobody.
Ooh, yes.
If you want to hear more about Ole Miss's struggles.
We're gonna do a deep dive on Georgia Southern this week.
Oh,
I'm pretty sure.
good.
Oh,
Good.
yeah,
Good.
see?
That is so Podcast Ain't Played Nobody. It hurts.
Yeah, you might want to get another server just to handle all of the waves of traffic flowing in. Just
tough.
be safe.
All right. Thanks a lot,
All right,
Bill.
thank you, Bill.
You want to just chat?
Yeah, let's
we
just
got
chat.
we got some chat topics. All right. I'm going to start here.
Please.
We're in year 3 of the playoff. Mm-hmm. Do we understand how this thing works at this point?
No, we
Okay.
do not. I think, once again, to get back to what I said at the beginning of the show, the playoff is a separate entity from the conferences.
Okay.
And the people that are selecting the teams in the
The
playoff.
NCAA, we should point out, the NCAA tweeted out this morning, they were like, hey, did you know the NCAA has actually nothing to do with the
Literally
college football
zero to
playoff?
do.
So don't at us, please.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Good for them.
But
Wise.
yeah, go ahead.
No, I think it's important to think about this in terms of there are a group of people trying to figure out and come to a consensus about not just the teams that are the best, but the factors that are the most important.
Right.
And there's no way that each of them is just like, okay, this is 20% for me, this is 25% for me, and we all agree. I think that's the important thing, and I thought a lot of our callers and our guests were correct that don't lose to Pitt.
Yeah.
I mean, that is a winnable game that Penn State lost.
Yeah.
And it is great that they won the Big Ten, and it's a wonderful story. It is a wonderful football thing. But in the end, it is a resume. And honestly, Penn State actually ended up helping Ohio State by giving them a really good loss.
Yeah, absolutely.
And that is the sort of irony of everything.
So imagine the whole season, everything else this season plays out the exact same way, except Penn State beats Pitt.
Yes.
At the time, a game which was not really going to boost them up the rankings.
Right.
It was not, it's not like that win would have given them that much more other than one tally here instead of one tally here.
Right.
Are they in?
I think
And
so.
if so, at whose expense? Are they in over Ohio State at that point?
I think
Because
they
that
might
suggests
be,
to me that Ohio State's, that makes Ohio State's loss even better
it makes their
in
loss
some
better.
sense, and it doesn't really change Ohio State's resume.
But in retrospect, it also means that they've beaten both Pitt and Temple in the non-conference portion of their
Yes,
schedule.
sure.
They've played 9 conference games and a conference championship game. So their resume is it's fortified even more at this point. So I would say yes. At that point, the argument for putting Penn State in over Ohio State is considerably more robust.
I think they'd have knocked out Washington.
Really?
I think they'd have knocked out Washington, and then we would have had the discussion of should Ohio State be here instead of Washington. But here I do want to get
You're not wrong. You're not
get to non-conference for a bit, because a lot is made of this in terms of and so much of this goes back to I think Baylor in their peak years when they were playing literally nobody out of
Northwestern
conference, and they were making those were tactical choices of a sort to say, we think the Big 12 is a very hard conference to play in. We want to get as many wins as possible.
And they want to be bowl eligible. At the time they scheduled those games, they were trying to get bowl eligible.
These games are scheduled so far out that you look at them. We started out the season looking at, let's take Michigan's schedule, for example. And we said, oh my God, who are they even playing? They're playing a UCF team that went winless last year. They're playing Hawaii.
After Hawaii played in Australia.
They're playing Colorado, which we thought was a basement team. Colorado played in the Pac-12 championship.
Yeah.
UCF, much better this season. Hawaii going to a bowl game. So just in the course of a year, you can see the idea
10-win Colorado.
Who are you playing? Who are you playing, and who are you beating? And there's sort of an intent thing that goes into that.
Right.
I want to illustrate that by doing this. These are real games that are scheduled to play in 2019, non-conference games, and I just want you to say, do you think by the time we get there, both of these teams will be good?
2019. So you'll be watching with your 4 kids then. Okay.
Oh my God. All right, let's start.
2019.
Ohio State plays TCU in 2019. How confident are you, percentage-wise, that we'll get that game in 2019 will be a game that we say, oh boy, that is a resume builder for both teams? TCU, down year this year. Beating TCU would not have done anything
Still
for Ohio State this year. If you swap TCU for Oklahoma this year, Ohio State's probably not in the playoff.
Yeah, I'm 79% sure that
Okay.
will be a good win for either team.
I love the precision.
Yeah.
I love the precision.
I'm not quite at
Okay.
80.
Oklahoma State, Oregon State. They play in 2019. Oklahoma State looked very good this season.
Mm-hmm.
You know, couldn't pull it out in Bedlam, had some stumbles here and there.
Oregon State trajectory is certainly
Oregon
the upward
State's
motion.
trajectory is upward, but if you looked at when this game was scheduled, you would
Right.
say Oklahoma State dodging a real
Yes.
competition. But by 2019, what do we think about this?
58%.
Okay. North Carolina, South Carolina.
By 2019.
By 2019. Will Muschamp coming off his third SEC championship, I assume.
I don't think
at that
people are
point.
the most confident that Larry Fedora is long for Chapel Hill.
Sure,
either
but
way.
he's certainly built a program in
That somebody could come in,
a very
yeah.
impressive way. Yeah.
68%.
Okay. This one you're gonna hate.
Okay.
Auburn, Oregon.
It's a great question. And it's
Auburn, Oregon, two of, I think, right now, the most volatile programs in the Power Five.
Yeah, what a weird, since 2010, the 5 or 6 years,
Yeah.
the ups and downs
Yeah.
of these two programs, it's been pretty incredible. I would say by 2019, so let's say if Gus Malzahn, for whatever reason, is not the coach, they
Yep.
will hire somebody. We assume they're going to pay good money for a big
Sure,
coach.
there's always an Iowa State coach out there that you.
It will be the third season of whoever Oregon either has hired in the past 40 minutes
yeah.
or will hire today or tomorrow.
Yeah.
I would say there is a 82% chance that is an impressive win in either direction.
Yeah. Okay. But I think it's lower than that.
Why?
Just because I think there's a good chance we get to 2019 and one of those teams we're like, that's a 7-5 team.
Yeah, just because it's
You know.
just so up and down.
Yeah,
The margin
yeah.
of error for Auburn being in the SEC West and having Alabama
Right.
to play and compete against and recruit against, and Oregon never having hired a coach.
Right. So there
in recent memory.
there is a realistic
outside.
case where we could get to 2019 and
Yeah.
say, oh, well, let's say we're talking about Auburn versus Oklahoma State for a playoff spot.
Yeah,
And we say, oh, well, Oklahoma State played Oregon State and Auburn only played Oregon.
yeah,
And we mean it in that way.
right.
That's how crazy the obsession with non-conference is to me. I think if
Right.
you attempt to play meaningfully good teams,
Right.
and you beat them, Bud made a very good point here. You can't just play a tough non-conference
Sure.
schedule. You have to win it. That's what should count.
And if it were Nebraska this year in the conversation
Yes.
to get into the playoff,
Yeah.
because at a certain point it looked like they can win double-digit games.
We're Texas. No, I'm just kidding.
If it were Texas,
just
no.
kidding.
But if it were Nebraska this year,
Yeah.
having beaten a 4-8 Oregon team
Yeah.
is different than beating a 4-8 other team that is perennially just struggling to get bowl eligible.
Right.
There is still the respect this year because of Oregon's recent success.
Maybe.
I think so.
I don't know how much that gets you.
Right.
In the end.
No, I mean it's not a huge thing.
It's just I really am impressed by how everything just fell right into place for the playoff committee to
Yeah.
not have anything terrible happen. Houston was good enough to knock off Oklahoma and Louisville
Mm-hmm.
and sort of eliminate them as question by the end of the season.
Right.
Houston wasn't good enough to actually be in the playoff conversation by the
Right.
end of the season because the way things shook out, I mean, undefeated Houston, if they had beaten SMU and Navy and I forget who they lost to in their last game before Tom Herman bolted.
Memphis.
Memphis.
Yeah.
I think they probably get in this year.
If they run the table,
Yeah. I think so. I
it
think
depends how they do it. If they're blowing out the better teams on their
Yeah.
schedule. If the style points are there, having beaten Florida State and having an impressive year last year, yeah, that's interesting.
think
Something
they
else
might.
to consider.
Yeah.
Both looking backwards and forwards.
Yeah.
One, obviously, the team that is clearly not in the playoff that affected the playoff most,
Florida.
the Pitt Panthers. They're this year's Minnesota.
Yeah,
They're
right.
this year's Minnesota. And also something that we have not brought up because we don't know what's going to happen. Lane Kiffin's interviewing for a head coaching job, allegedly, reportedly,
Yes.
today.
Yeah.
And if he takes this job, if he's offered the job,
He said he's going to keep coaching.
he's going to coach throughout.
the
He's going to do the
that's
Tom
what he's
Herman
claimed.
thing.
I mean,
Okay. Well,
I don't know if that's all right. Well, before we go, let's do the thing everybody hates.
yeah.
Should the playoff get bigger? What would a bigger playoff look like even this year? Because if we go based on, let's assume it's still committee run.
Mm-hmm.
16 playoff this year, as you alluded to. 3 Big Ten teams, not just 3 Big Ten teams, 3 teams from one division
Who have all played each other already this year.
who've all played each other. I mean,
And doesn't affect what those top 6 look like.
if the
it
committee
were,
knows that
yes.
if they have to pick 6.
Yeah, because right now
Yes.
saying 5 and 6
I think the committee absolutely once they get the top 4, everything else is about feelings.
Right.
Everything else is about like, hey, Penn State, we still love you. I know we're just friends, but I hope we can still hang out.
Yep.
You can't hang out.
No, you cannot. No, it's best that you just
Yeah,
defriend.
So I think that's part of it. I think, and I don't know what the world looks like because even in that example, we still have Pac-12 representative, ACC representative, SEC representative. If we had a 6-team playoff with 3 Big Ten teams and no Big 12 team, I don't know how that would go.
I would, for just pure entertainment purposes and a defensible resume reason,
Yeah.
I would say if we could get 5 Penn State, 6 Oklahoma would probably be it. I wouldn't hate it.
But it's tough. It's tough because
and of the teams left out of the top 4, the best single thing out there in that ether is Michigan's defense.
Sure.
That is the best single thing. Better than Oklahoma's offense.
You think better than Oklahoma's offense?
Yeah.
I don't know, man. I like Oklahoma's offense.
I like
a lot.
Oklahoma's offense a lot, but we've seen.
I think they're going to be in the Sugar Bowl, and I think Florida hopefully will not because I really don't want. Oh my God.
All right.
Oh my God. If we went to 8 teams.
Yeah. If we went to 8 teams, that's the most entertaining. Like, this is an entertaining year because then you probably get USC, and you almost assuredly get USC and Oklahoma.
I would think so, yes.
And what the playoff this year is lacking is experienced, dangerous quarterbacks. With no Penn State, with no Baker Mayfield, with no Sam Darnold.
You have one.
You have one.
Currently in the playoff,
right.
An experienced, dangerous quarterback.
Jake Browning is in his 2nd year, and he put up ridiculous numbers this year.
So that's fine. I still am willing to sort of say he's on the cusp of experience.
Right. TBD in terms of big national games. So, yeah, maybe 1.5. But expanding to 8 teams gets us more complete games, I would say, because of quarterback play.
Probably.
Yeah.
Do you think, all right, should the college football committee as a whole, should they expand the playoff past 4 teams?
I think so. There are always going to be arguments. I think 6 is a sweet spot.
6 is a sweet spot?
I think 6
is a sweet spot. You giving a bye? I hate the bye, man.
I'm not crazy about the bye. I'm not crazy about it, but it gets us on campus.
You know why I hate the bye?
Why?
Because then, like right now we say, okay, Clemson's the 2 seed. Ohio State's the 3 seed. Doesn't really matter. It's just a matter of what uniform you get to wear. And granted, I think they also.
So we're getting 2 arguments on separate, separate theaters.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yes. But
2 versus 3.
I will say once again, I'm so glad this is not a 2-team championship year. It would have been. The fighting would have been so bad. So bad.
I'm happy to.
And Ohio State wouldn't be in.
No. No.
I don't think this was just cosmetic. I think they absolutely would have said, no, we're not putting a non-conference, no.
Yeah, it would not have been 2011 all over again with Alabama getting in.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I agree with Jason Kirk. You could either go 1 team or 6 teams this year, and that feels like the most accurate for the teams playing at the highest level.
Do you think we're going to see a 2-loss team? Mm-hmm. What's going to happen next? A 2-loss team makes the college football playoff, which I don't believe has happened yet, correct?
That doesn't sound, yeah.
And we have also not had 2 teams from the same conference in yet.
Right.
Which one do you think happens first? And maybe they happen simultaneously because of the way it sort of works out.
Absolutely. I think it's the 2 teams from the same conference thing happens first. Because
obviously got very close this year.
It got very close this year, and I think when you have concentrated great teams in the same division, that opens it up even more. Like, I don't think the SEC West is going to have Alabama and 5 4-loss teams again. Like, I don't see that.
I'm thinking about who the coaches are in the SEC West, and I'm like,
I'm confident that LSU can improve with a better offensive system.
That's true.
I'm confident that, all right, I've gone over the teams that I think can improve.
We are confident
in the
that
SEC
Ole Miss
West.
will not be as snake bit as they were.
I think that's fair to say. And they're the 1 team that has had Alabama's number.
We are confident that Dan Mullen looks really funny.
Chomping a cigar?
UT Chattanooga.
UT Chattanooga. And then the Big Ten East, the Pac-12 North, I don't think Stanford's going to be repeatedly only a 9-3 team. I think Washington's going to continue to be very good. Beyond that, I don't know in the Pac-12. The Pac-12 South, if UCLA improves, they're not terribly far off talent-wise.
I don't know. This is the last thing we're going to do because we've almost gone an hour.
Yeah.
Next year's top 4. Go. Just off the top of your head.
Alabama, Florida State.
Didn't think you were going to stop at Florida. Don't worry.
Florida A&M?
Yeah.
Florida State, Alabama, Oklahoma, Baker Mayfield has said he's returning. He has time to change his mind. You know what? Let's go. Let's go Michigan.
Oh, I knew.
Let's go Michigan.
I knew.
Let's go Michigan.
Good.
Yeah.
That'd be a fun one.
That's all I have.
Okay.
What is your top 4 next year?
No, I don't have to do this.
Okay,
This is my
fine.
question.
Okay.
All right. That's all we have for the very last. No, not the very. Well, yes, it is the very last wake up for calendar year
2016.
2016.
Yeah, we'll be here early next year.
Doing something for the national championship, probably post semifinals as well. Though I don't know what the hell we're going to do.
We'll figure something out.
Figure it out. We'll see you. We'll see.
Yeah.
We'll talk to you. We'll talk to you in the comments here. We'll talk to you on Twitter. Email me. I'll give you Dan's address. You can go talk to him in person.
It's
here
much
for you.
easier that way.
We're here for you. He has a
All right.
great kitchen. You've seen that.
All right. Thank you, everybody, for watching, and we'll see you soon.